Alright, with those viewfinder windows cleaned carefully using a microfiber cloth, I can put them back in place. Now they've got one beveled edge which goes up here against the camera body, inside the camera top. Now this one here goes there. Okay, so they're sitting there just like that. Now I've got to slide the top cover over them without disturbing anything and fit the two retaining screws in that bracket. Get them started. Hold that firmly to the front of the camera, nip those two screws up. That's our top cover. Nice clean sparkly windows, exactly what we want. And that can just about go back on the camera body. Turn me out a bit, that way, that way, that way. That's better. Right. Rotate that, release that shutter, rotate that 90 degrees so it's in the park position. Easily place the film advance and remove it in that position, everything will move smoothly. Lift that lever off carefully. Check my rangefinder for fingerprints. No, it's still looking nice and clean. Oh yes, our film release button needs to go on there, which means we need its spring. There are two little coil springs that look much the same. One of them is slightly smaller diameter than the other, and the one that's slightly smaller diameter is the one that goes in this tube here for our rewind film release button. And the film release button, it's done a run there, has it? It certainly has. It's hiding. And it was here a second ago too. It'll have to try harder than that if it wants to get away. Get this in position. Get our film advance lever in position. Hold that down, rotate it clockwise and everything clicks into place. Sounds good. Here's the screw. Hold that down. Again, check that everything's clicked in position. Sounds good. Frame counter's working smoothly. Two screws to hold the top cover in position, one at each end of the top cover. Now these screws are quite short. If you lose one or you're missing one and you find another chrome screw from say a Retina IIc camera that you'd like to use as the replacement, it'll stick through too far here and catch the film advance mechanism, and the film advance lever won't move smoothly if at all. There's the collar that goes on there. Now we want our rewind here. Let's clean this quickly. Bit dusty, bit grimy. Make sure that's clean. Now all of this was rattling loose when we started. We have a wavy washer here that provides a bit of controlled friction. Put that over the top. Now this should have been done up tight. It was loose. screw screws into this knob should be done up tight. And then the knob can be screwed into the top of the rewind, check that that moves correctly, something through the fork to stop it turning, do that up with your fingers, that's it. So what else does the body need? Well, what the body needs here is that missing piece of leather replaced, because that had been replaced with a smear of black paint previously. Well, I have a piece here. So first a wipe with naphtha to make sure there's no grease on there, and there could well be from all the handling. And a wipe of naphtha there. Adhesive. I'll just put a little bit on a smear of paper because we're not wanting much. I'll move that across with a toothpick. Make sure I get a good cover, but it doesn't need to be thick. That'll do nicely. I'm taking my patch, lower that into position, press it down. So now we have something that looks like a camera, works like a camera, and only lacks one very important set of components. It has no shutter and lens. So I better deal with that. Where are they? Here they are. Oh, that looks grimy. Well, let's start at the outside and work in. I'll remove the retainer ring. There's a spacing shim there, and it's quite a big one. The rear group doesn't want to come unscrewed, but we'll deal with that. Get the front group off. That's a trim ring. It doesn't serve any other purpose. It doesn't act as a spacing shim. It's a trim ring. It's not under any tension. Right, that rear group, let's get that loose. That is quite tight. It's quite a rough feel to that thread too. Just looking at that, there's nothing obviously wrong with that. That lens is incredibly filthy. And something else interesting there too. The lens is covered in rubbish, but you'll see clear glass around the edges here. That should have been blacked out. That's otherwise that could scatter light and create a nuisance. Let's have a little quick clean of that lens and see if it cleans up. You can see all the black specks coming off there. Now I can feel something stuck in the middle. Get another one. Being heavily concave, it's very hard to tell what you're looking at from the concave side. Usually you can see better from the other side looking through. Well, that looks a lot better than it did. I think that'll clean up okay. Alright, I'll pop that lens aside because lenses is not what I'm here to do at the moment. I want to do this shutter. So what can we tell immediately with the shutter? Well, there are two screws that hold this piece in place. One of them's gone. So we're missing a screw. That'll explain why this is a bit floaty here. The diaphragm is very, very reluctant to move. It's very, very oily. There's a lot of dirt here too. Okay, we'll start stripping it down. Just undo that lock. Lift the bayonet piece off the front. Here's our shutter speed settings cam plate. Shutter release. Oh, there's something really odd and ugly in here. This has been extensively buggered around with. It's missing pieces, pieces are broken. This will be fun, trying to make a working shutter out of this. That lever's bent. That's the first thing that caught my attention. That spring is distorted. This has been broken by an expert. What a mess. Okay. This will be a salvage operation. I'll unhook that spring. That's been mutilated. It shouldn't look like that. This spring's up the wrong way. This spring is dislodged from its correct position. It should have been up here. It was tucked down there. This is, I haven't seen a disaster like this for a while. That is somebody's just buggered this up. They've just done terrible things. Things are missing. Lots of things are missing. The screw here should be here. The screw here should be here. This wasn't done by a skilled technician. This has been mutilated by an idiot. That screw is missing its spring. There's the B lever's missing. There's no B lever in this shutter. The spring's present, but it's not connected. There's the pallet. I'll lift off the moving flash contact. The contact's been mutilated. It's all folded over at the end. I'm not even sure how you'd go about doing that. There's our 500th of a second speed spring. There's the cam that operates the flash sync mechanism. Take the screw out of this flash contact post here. Now the outer case, of course, is only held on with one screw instead of two. The other one's missing. Where did that one go to? Did that just jump off? It did. Oh, we'll find that in a second. Get the case off. The flash sync wire, I'm amazed to see that that's actually in position. I'll be even more amazed if the little plastic insulator's present and correct. It could be. Oh, that's jammed. That doesn't want to come out. Something's seriously wrong there. This has a very melted look about it. It's either been melted with solvent or it's glue. I think most likely it's melted with solvent. Yeah, that wire is sort of glued in position. Oh, that won't come loose. Well, I think that we'll be building another shutter for this camera. We'll have to see what we can salvage from this. This is a dog's breakfast. I'm surprised that it even worked to the extent that it did. Of course, I didn't test any of the speeds. Oh, can't even get the mechanism plate out. Right, there's our case. It's exceptionally dirty. I can't tell immediately whether that's just dirt or whether that's corrosion. The diaphragm here is very sticky. Our mechanism plate, well, there's our flash contact, and it does look like solvent damage. It does have its insulator in place. But I don't know whether we'll get this off in one piece or not. Yeah, I don't like my chances. Let's see what happens. Yeah, that plastic's been very melted, or a solvent adhesive has been used and that's done the job. I'd really like to salvage that flash contact if I could. No, it's fallen to bits. It's just been ruined. Now how you go about doing that, because it's a styrene type plastic, it's very sensitive to solvents. Now if some idiot decides that flood cleaning a shutter is a clever thing to do, and they get into it with some useful solvent, it just turns this to mush. I suspect that's what's happened. Okay, start dismantling this and see how we get on. And there was me thinking the film advance lever was the most serious problem with this camera. And that was not exactly the case. So we need a B lever, the B lever return spring. The shutter release lever has a very damaged spring on it, which may or may not be able to true that up, so I might have to replace the whole thing. The flash contact is mutilated. The moving flash contact was mutilated. The flash post is mutilated. This spring's been mutilated. I don't even know why people do some of these things, what they could hope to achieve by it. And everything's very dirty. Retard gear train's a bit dirty, but it appears to function. Push that one to one side. I usually start servicing with the diaphragm, so I might just as well do that here. Okay, well I'll start stripping down the diaphragm, and I'll do that first. I start by removing the settings lever. Here's our settings lever. I'll just recover those two shoulder screws, pop them over there with it. And here we have the case. 3 screws hold the retaining ring in place. That screw was loose. That screw was just tight enough. That screw was just tight enough. Not tightened properly, or they've all worked loose. So those are those components tipped out. Here's our rosette of blades. Now blades will come out in a rosette even if they're not oily, as long as they're closed as far as that, but you should be able to shake it apart. These blades are stuck together. That's oil doing that. So all of those need to be carefully cleaned. You can tell by the sheen on those that, you know, they're just not clean, they're just filthy. You know, very, very filthy. That's just a mess. That case is a mess. And I'll start cleaning this with some naphtha, and I'll be interested to see if that shutter case cleans up, because that filth could even be corrosion in there. Those marks are not wiping off. Which suggests corrosion. I'll have a look at my... This is really, really grimy. Now the camera didn't show any signs of being a swimmer. Now look at this. So there's paint in here. That means that rear lens group that was very difficult to get out. I think that that was in here, and it's been, solvent's been sprayed in here, and that solvent has melted that paint away. It's been noted the missing paint off the back of that lens, and the paint's run down here in the thread. So I'm fairly convinced that this shutter was killed by some clown squirting solvent into it. We already know that the flash contact was ruined with solvent. And as for the mechanical damage, parts missing, parts bent. I don't know at what stage they got into that. I'll have to get into this with some acetone and get that paint off, because that's not going to be any good to us. Back once I've got this clean. Well, a lot of work with some metal polish has cleaned up that shutter case quite well. That was definitely corrosion. Looking at the pattern of it, I really don't know what to say about that. It doesn't look like the camera's been a swimmer. There's no sign of corrosion on the camera anywhere else but this shutter, and this shutter showed plenty of it. So I strongly suspect that it was flood cleaned. This is the back of the mechanism plate there. It was flood cleaned, and whatever was used, possibly alcohol, had a fairly high water content, and it was allowed to sit and just corrode away. I can't think of any other easy explanation for it, but that corrosion was pretty obvious and it was pretty deep, It's took quite a bit of polishing to clean that case up. You can still see where the corrosion's there. I mean, it's etched into that metal quite well. But I will have to clean up all of the other components, and like this retainer plate. Well, this is very oily. I mean, some of the stuff is oily, and the oil that's on there may have protected it from corrosion, but it certainly didn't protect that aluminium. And this mechanism plate has exactly the same sort of look, very dull and patches of corrosion. So yeah, what a mess. Here's the moving plate that swings the diaphragm blades inwards and outwards to change the aperture setting. Now I think you can see patches here. Now that's corrosion patches, and that's where the finish has gone off this completely. And that indicates to me that droplets of moisture sat there. I'll have to clean that with metal polish and see if I can get a better result than that. I'm ready to start putting this back together. I've got some components here cleaned up, ready to go. Just the case, the shutter case and the diaphragm components. I've got them cleaned up first of all, and I'd like to get the diaphragm reassembled. Now the blades were oily. They don't really show any signs of corrosion. It probably means that they were oily when whoever flood cleaned this shutter with something unsuitable did their worst. They were probably trying to get rid of the oil on the blades. They certainly didn't achieve that. It tells me that they weren't using an appropriate solvent, and very likely it was something, a polar liquid, something with a water content, which was then allowed to dry inside the shutter in its own good time. And you can see the shadow of corrosion here, where that was screwed up against the case. It's but the blades, they are just left oily. So chances are they were never cleaned. I don't like the finish on these blades. They're certainly not as regular and uniform as they should be. But by the same token, the blades are intact and smooth and should work fine. One more blade to go. Now I've got to lift these blades back over the earlier one. Get them all swung back into position. Hopefully I haven't disturbed anything, and that this will go back together smoothly. Well, that's my hope. We'll just have to hope for the best on that score. And the shutter case can go on. If I flip this over, get my jig in underneath, line up those screw holes. That's the countersunk screw, that goes there. I don't know how much of the shutter I'll be able to salvage. Probably about 85% of it, I think. It's the missing pieces that bother me the most. The missing B lever and that mess that was made of the fixed flash post, which had been destroyed by solvent, and the moving flash contact, which had inexplicably been bent back on itself. Someone had made a real mess of that. I've got no idea what they were attempting to do. Right, so that should be good. And the blades do move freely. That's good. So I can nip those 3 screws up now. There's a few marks on those blades. I will try to see if they'll clean up a little bit better. Those marks may be permanent. No, they're not going away. Well, there's a bit of staining coming off there. That was using a more energetic solvent than the naphtha. Let's close that down. Let's have another go with that. There's a bit of brown colour coming off there. That could be corrosion. But basically that's moving freely. That's nice. So the blade, the lever, the aperture settings lever can go on there now. Here it is. So I'd run some molybdenum paste through the centre and a little bit on the outside of this back here. That's where it bears against the back of the case. And make sure I get this the right way up. Yep. And I'll get those screws in place. Now you can see the video camera is going to die any second. Let's get these screws in here first, if I possibly can. If it suddenly stops going, you'll know why. And it'll be a jump to whatever the next piece was. It's not picking up that hole, why not? Let's just support this on that block of wood. See if I can get that screw started. And it should go in. That screw didn't really want to go in. I did notice that one of them was a bit tight, coming apart. Okay, there's my settings lever. That's moving nice and smoothly now. The blades, as you can see, look pretty good. Come on camera, do your job.